Hi everyone, and welcome to another video of Programming for Data Analytics Part 2. Today we're going to be looking at a very cool topic, and that is web scraping. And so web scraping is a lot of things. Ultimately, it's a form of information extraction, and so we're going to spend a bit of time on this, and today I am going to just give you an overview of what it is, what it's for, what it is and what it's not actually as well, and then we're going to focus on looking at APIs for a little bit of web scraping, and then on the later lectures then we'll focus on a little bit more of like manual web scraping where we don't have something like an API. Because when we have an API, that's like easy mode. But we don't have an API and we have to do like proper scraping, that's what's tricky. And so that's what will be interesting to talk about. But before that, let's start with the easy ones. Okay? So web scraping. There's multiple names for web scraping. So first of all, let me give you a couple of those. In general, it's information extraction, and so in this case, by saying web, we're talking about the World Wide Web or the internet. And so, we want to make sure we're on the same page on that we are talking about getting information from the internet. And so the internet is a relatively new invention, I would say, compared to things like computers. And so it only really came to be after like mid 90s, that's when it kind of started to grow in popularity. Early 2000s is when it kind of exploded. And so it's something new and it's still evolving. And so that's going to be your first issue. When you're trying to get information from something, and that something is something that is not static, that is ever changing, then things change, right? Like you can't just come up with the ultimate solution that's going to do everything you want, because unfortunately the target is a moving target and it changes. Okay, and so trying to get information or extract information from the web is an ongoing work. What today we use as the best and the latest, tomorrow is just going to be useless. And so it's an ongoing thing. So this video may be old quicker than I finish recording it ultimately. So that's just kind of how it works. Okay. But yeah, so web stands for World Wide Web, and some of the nicknames for web scraping are also things like web data extraction. So data extraction. You can also see things like information extraction. Harvesting, information harvesting, data harvesting, web harvesting, that kind of terminology. And by the way, do you know what scraping means? Scrape something. It's like when you have, like, let's say you have, something in your wall or your floor, and you're grabbing like a brush and you're kind of scraping it, scraping it really hard to remove like dirt from something, or in this case, try to remove something like a rock, and then you're scraping like a rock and trying to like get a little bit out. That's what scraping is. At least that's what I understand scraping to mean. But I can very quickly just look at the word scraping on Wikipedia and see if they have something. The action or sound of something scraping or being scraped. That's not very useful. The smell of something that has been obtained by scraping it from a surface. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I expected, but I thought they would use better terms in the same word in the definition. But you get what you get, right? And so ultimately, web scraping, as I'm going to call it for the rest of this, is all about extracting useful data from a website. And the reason I say website and not the internet is because the internet's a lot of things, right? And there's things like databases, and that's SQL, that's 651, data on 651. Getting information from SQL is not the same thing as web scraping. By the way, data mining, you'll hear that term used. A lot of the times that can be, that could actually include web scraping, because it's a very overarching term that's not really well defined. It's more of a buzzword, really. So when you say data mining a web page, that would also be fitting under this category, okay? And so to understand what the challenges are with trying to extract the information from a website, you have to understand a little bit about how websites work. And so when you go on the internet, you know, this is you on your computer, laptop, I guess. When you connect to the internet, what is happening is your computer is communicating to a server. In fact, technically speaking, since if I want to go further, a little bit more in depth, let's actually kind of break it down further. Since this is a laptop, more than likely you're connected either through Wi-Fi or through an Ethernet cable. And both of these things are connected to what is known as your router. Okay? Your router's job is to distribute internet across your local area network, also known as LAN, local area network. In fact, let me spell it out. Okay, now this create, as the name implies, creates a local network. So the local internet per se amongst your different devices, so that they can all coordinate to get access to the main pipeline to the internet. Now that main pipeline to the internet comes to your house in the form of a coaxial cable, usually, which will look like that with a little screw. It's kind of like the one you use for your cable TV. It could also come through fiber, which will look just like a straw, transparent straw, and that's optic fiber. Optic fiber. It could also, in theory, come from over the air, OTA, over the air, in the form of things like 5G or whatever, 4G, 3G, 2G, all the Gs. It could also be over antenna or even over satellite, okay? But ultimately, when all of these connections are coming in, let me actually move them around. So when all these connections are coming, whether it be over the air, they are basically coming to something known as your modem. A lot of the times when you hire internet services from a provider, your modem and your router will be the same device. That's not surprising. Although if you want to optimize things, it's good to make them separate devices so that you can really make it do what it's best done. So yeah. But anyways, so ultimately your router is usually hardwired through Ethernet connection to your modem, which is then connected to the internet. Okay. Now what I mean by the internet? Well, let's just pick one of these, coaxial. Okay. If you're connected to coaxial, this is being connected somewhere to a node. So like maybe outside of your house, there is a central of the different plugs for different houses. And from there, that signal kind of goes through a bigger wire or a set of wires all the way into your ISP, which stands for Internet Service Provider. Okay? That ISP then, if you're requesting to go to google.com or something, your request to google.com is what is known as it needs to do a domain name lookup, basically. So google.com is just a name, but actually servers are organized by IP addresses, and IP addresses are numerical values. There'll be something like dot number dot I think maybe three or four more numbers there. Maybe three numbers, but they only go from 0 to 255 for all these ranges. So like a valid IP would be like 123. Oh, yeah, 123. Dot 168 dot 22.1. That would be perfectly fine as well. Okay, just up to 3 digits and up to 0 to 255 within the combos. So like the biggest one you could see, I suppose, would be that. Okay. And so that translation happens. I mean, it can actually happen on your local, on your even your machine if you have a host file. But if not, it can happen somewhere in the ISP. And so ultimately, when it has the address that it wants to go to, so in this case, let's just say that it wants to go to this address, the ISP then connects you to the server there. Okay, there might be different sort of middle points there. Like if you're going across the Pacific, there might be less, some hub where all the cables kind of from the different like local ISPs come together, and then they go over the big wire over under the ocean, things like that. but ultimately you get to the server for there, okay? Now in the server, you get the information, and then the server sort of starts the same process to send it back. Within the server, this IP could be in like a data center, which could have its own local area network, which would have its own sort of modem router situation to find out the individual data, okay? Now, the reason why I'm going over this, since this isn't really a networking class, is when you're looking at a website, the website may come from one spot, but the information that is in that website may come from multiple servers. So for example, if you're looking at Amazon may have, you know, the ads that are being shown at the top here, like those ads may come from a certain server that is delivering the ads. And they don't even have to be in the same data center, it could be completely across the world. And then the database that is then showing all the products could come from a different server, that's an Amazon server probably. And then your account information could come from another server within Amazon, but it could be completely different Amazon warehouses per se, okay? But ultimately, all that information comes together through Amazon's website and is delivered to you as a nice and pretty website, which is this. So this is a combination. Now, how does it get delivered to you? Okay, well, when you create websites, you use different programming languages for that. Now, we know Python in this class, this is what we've been using, but there are other programming languages out there, different kinds. And so in the world of the internet and websites, some of the popular names that you hear are things like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a bunch more. Within these, there's of course things like Bootstrap and all these fancy things that you get to do, but ultimately these are sort of like the main languages that this is on. So if you're looking at web code, and you can go in developer mode on any website and look at the web code, you can see that while your website looks pretty and colorful and all these pictures and stuff, it boils down to just a bunch of programming code. Very boring. In fact, there's no pictures in the code. It's just literally code, just like if you're writing code. But of course, you know, just think about it in Python when you open a file, how you say like file open. That's the same way if you want to load in an image for a website. You could technically have some sort of file load and then display an image or a video or things like that. And so that's what the website really is. It's only your browser that translates that code into the pretty website that you see. So what you're getting from the server is all of this. And of course you're getting the imagery as well, but the images are just like file names. You know, like think of it like that. So you're getting a bunch of code and a bunch of like media. And then it's up to your machine to basically Lego it back together. Okay? So that's how it works, and that's how you load information. And so what we're trying to do again is we're trying to extract useful information from a website. And so because of that, we have different places where we can try to do that. We can, of course, just try to go from the final product, which is just going to be a beautiful canvas of colors and pictures and videos and text and different fonts and just different decorations, moving stuff, flash, all this crazy combo of beautiful stuff that makes a website look attractive. We can try to do it from there, but we can also try to do it on this stage when we're getting the code and the media. I'm not saying one way is particularly better than the other. I'm just saying these are different ways that you can get the information. Okay? So, by the way, just a little interesting fact, when you go to a website, you usually type in HTTP, right? This stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, so Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and then when you see HTTPS, it's because it's a secured Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And so ultimately, you have that chance to try to extract the information here in the code. You can try to extract it from the files themselves or from the final product, okay? And so what I'm about to show you today, you know, of trying to fetch this information, it's actually not quite, well, kind of is in this format. Well, in addition to getting media files, you also just get raw text as part of the, in addition to the code. Like media can also include just a bunch of text. So like one of these could just be pure text. I'm going to show you a way when you actually ask the website for information and you get it in a nicely organized text. But later on, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to actually get stuff at any of these different layers. We're going to try to get stuff from the media, we're going to try to get stuff from the code, and from the final website itself. Okay? Now, why code this kind of thing versus like, just you literally going on Wikipedia and copying and pasting the information you need if that's what you're looking for, or if you're trying to scrape information from a store, then go there. Why code? The reason being is what the automation reasoning for this is quantity. We're in this data analytics game, and the idea behind this is we're trying to get a lot of data. That takes a lot of time for a normal human to do, whereas a computer can make that happen way, way faster, and it can not just make it happen faster, but it can keep doing it over and over again. So for example, suppose that you're trying to get flight ticket information. If you as a human want to do that right now, like I want to find out how much tickets are to go to London, so like I want to go from like LA to London. You can go on like Google Flights or Expedia or one of those websites, and then or directly on like British Airways or something, and look up the flights for a given date, and you know the price. Okay, cool. You could make a decision at that time to make a purchase, or you might be like, I want to wait for a deal. Well, if you as a human want to check for a deal, then you're going to have to put an alarm and every day maybe check, or maybe not every day, but maybe like once a week, log in and check prices and then, make a decision if you ever see a deal, right? Okay. You could catch the deal. You could also miss it. A machine, and I'm not saying this, there's limitations to this one. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. But a machine could literally check every minute. All websites that sell tickets constantly, repeatedly, keep checking every minute of every hour of every day. And the moment that there's a sale, two things can happen. One of them, I guess if you're not that good of a coder or you want to play it safe, it can just send you a notification, whether it be an email or a text message or whatever notification you'd like, make Alexa yell at you or something, that there's a sale. And this is the price. Do you want to buy it? Log in now before you lose the sale. Or you could even code in that purchase will happen automatically. Of course, when you automate things with purchases involved, there's always the risk of ending up buying a billion different tickets for the same flight or something, You're like, oh snap, I screwed up my code. Instead of buying one ticket, I bought 100. Now what? So easier, you think this won't happen, but it has happened a lot of times. And so that's the power of automation and the power of web scraping, because without being able to take the information from the website and automatically process it to find out if there's a deal, so you have to scrape the data from the website, analyze the data, understand the data so that you know what is and isn't the price. Because you could scrape the data from a flighting website, but are you sure you're scraping for the right date, for the right flight, like as in the right destinations? Or are you like accidentally scraping a flight from like New York to LA instead of like LA to London? And so you end up buying the wrong ticket, or you end up thinking that there's a sale when it's not even the right destination. And so ultimately, that's the power that you gain, that you're able to automate these things and you're able to like refresh the data and keep it fresh and do analysis on large data sets as well, and so on. But let me pause right there with the pros and talk about the cons. But before I do that, let's really understand the motivations for scraping. So like, what can I do with scraping? And what do I like? What are some of the things that you want to do? Okay? And so I have a list here, and I'm going to kind of read. Or I had a list. I don't know where that went. Here we go. Okay. So some of the usages of web scraping. Okay, so there's a lot of different levels, whether it be like at a personal level or like a professional level. Okay. So I already told you an example of a personal one. So like, let's say I'm looking for flight tickets and I'm trying to find a deal. And so this could be simply, purchase monitoring. At a personal level. But it could also be at a business level. So for example, you sell products and you want to monitor the competition. So you want to monitor some brands and do competition analysis. So for example, you work for a business that sells pants and you want to always find out when other companies, such as like, let's say I'm just going to throw in some names. Let's say you work for, what's like a medium tier, Levi's one of the medium tier, but like Levi's is like a popular jeans brand, right? Okay. So you work for Levi's and Levi's needs to not only monitor their brand, but they want to see where it's being sold and what kind of sales there are, for both to monitor how things are selling, like popularity of the brand. If someone's selling it really cheap, like what's happening is the brand not selling at normal price, but also you want to monitor other brands. So for example, Calvin Klein makes jeans as well, or Banana Republic makes jeans, right? So you want to monitor those companies and see if they're running any sales that are going to affect you or any major like campaigns. And so to do that, you need to monitor the websites. I mean, of course they could do in-person sales, but we're talking about monitoring online marketplaces. So you could monitor the Banana Republic website. You could monitor the Calvin Klein website. You could also monitor the stores that sell it, like Macy's and Kohl's or JCPenney and Costco or whatever, Walmart, outlets, and so on, or like a fashion show, mall, stores, that kind of stuff. So you could monitor those stores and keep track of what kind of prices are showing, not just for your own items, but even for the competition. And then you can once you have that data locally, then of course you can run all models that you want, and we'll play with some machine learning later on in the semester. You can run all predictions you want, all analysis you want, and then present your report for the people that want to make the decision. Like, hey, I see a trend that the prices of our jeans in general are starting to go down. Like there's a lot of sales. Like, maybe that's not a good sign. Like, I mean, we should decrease our production amount. Like increase scarcity, or maybe like, we need to like redo things and make them better. Or for example, there's a lot of sales for like our competitors. Maybe we should think about doing a sale so that, so we stay relevant. So all of that monitoring is very useful for not just your personal level of trying to get a deal, but also for a company to find out what the customer reaction feel is. You could also use it to look at reviews. So on Amazon, if you're selling a product on Amazon and you want to keep track of how the reviews are doing, if you start to see a downward trend, you can sort of find out why. You can change your marketing or review the product. You can all do those things. But to do that, you need to be able to look at all of the Amazon reviews. Now you might be like, well, Amazon can just send me an email with all of the reviews. Yeah, they're not going to do that. It's up to you to get that information. They might make it accessible through what is known as an API, which I'll talk about, but they're not just going to send you an email and be like, here you go, sir. Here are all your reviews, so you can do it. Like, yeah, like here, you do it, man. We got a lot of, get in line basically to get some service like on that level. Okay. In addition to that, if you're trying to, so that's one of them. So another thing that's kind of really big with this is going to be like your AI or your machine learning. So when you're trying to train something like a model, and of course, again, we haven't really talked much about machine learning. I do have the bonus lectures already there for you to watch, but we haven't really talked much about like machine learning in general. But ultimately, machine learning and AI, when you're trying to train a machine to learn something, the best way to do that is to give it as much information as possible, so that it can actually make its own conclusions, and those conclusions are accurate. So, I don't know for a non-person that knows machine learning how obvious or clear that sounds, but ultimately, think about it this way. If I'm trying to teach you how to jump rope, like how to jump the rope, maybe, or that's not something, so maybe something that I know how to do. Okay, maybe tennis, play tennis, okay? I know a little bit of tennis, okay? So if I'm trying to teach you, a robot, how to play tennis, the best way that I can do that is I can just record all of the pros playing tennis and like how they move their hand to hit the racket, whether they're hitting it this way, or like, like a slam or something. I can just record non-stop video of them from different angles and everything, and just feed it to the machine. And over the course of time, it would be the same thing if I try to taught you. If I said I want you to like play tennis better, one of the ways that I can do that is I can just show you the right way to hit the ball and just show you a bunch of those videos every day. And after a while, repetition, you're going to start to figure out that there's a pattern to this, how you move your hand. That's how machines learn. You have to just keep feeding it different variations so that when it sees a brand new scenario, it can look at its sort of repertoire of previous experience and say, okay, this is how I need to react. This is my prediction. Okay, or how do I need to move my hand to hit the ball? So, the summary of this, for now, at least that you should know, is that the more data, the better. Okay? One last example that I just thought of is Tesla and self-driving cars. So, self-driving cars, they're still on their way. Hopefully we get to see them pretty soon, but we still haven't gotten something that is fully autonomous out there in the road. Some of the people that have been closest to that are, of course, Waymo and Tesla. And so they need a lot of data to be able to train their models to be able to react correctly in traffic. And so one of the ways it's doing that, Tesla, is they're beta testing their self-driving, and they're getting all of that data from hundreds of thousands of users out there that are using this. Well, I don't know if it's hundreds of thousands at this point. It could be just thousands, but lots of people that are driving, and they're feeding it more and more data so that you can have huge amounts of data to train it. And the more data, the better you can train it. Okay? When I say more data, I'm talking literally big data. Okay? You need huge amounts of data to train a model to be really good. Of course, you can try to optimize it as much as possible to require the least amount of data, but there really isn't a good replacement for good quality data. And to get good quality data, you have to get a ton of data so that you can filter out the so-so data and get the good stuff. It's like you start out with all this stuff, and once you clean it, you end up with this nice gold stuff. So the more of this you have, the more little stuff you can get at the end of the line. So you just keep wanting more and more data, okay? And so when it comes to trying to get data, one of the great resources out there is the internet, because it's so huge. And so one of the big usages of web scraping is to try to get data from the internet. And so for the purposes of using it for machine learning, okay? And so if you're trying to write a model that can predict whether an Amazon item is going to sell well based on reviews, then you just need tons of review data and tons of pricing data for that to work. Okay, so that's on your machine learning side. Another big thing about that, at least in the last few years, that has become huge for web scraping is finance. Okay, and so nowadays when you are there's a lot of automation in things like stock market. Okay, so by that I'm saying that there's a lot of machines that will automatically sell and buy certain stocks, whether that be long-term or just day trading. There's a lot of automation in that world. A lot of systems that are supposed to give you a prediction or a warning, like you should sell this, you should buy this, you should do this, you should not do this, and do sort of risk assessment. One of the big factors into how a stock can be affected is what is happening in the world. Suppose that you have a stock. I don't want to say a name because I'm talking about a stock, right? But let's just say that let's talk about the Star Wars universe, okay? In the Star Wars universe, they have, what are they called? What are they called? The light speed crystals. Not Nova crystals, but, hold on. I gotta Google this now. I gotta look at the plot line of the movie to remember. It's a type of crystal. Blah blah blah. Okay. Kyber crystals, maybe. Is that it? Kyber? No, that's the lightsaber. Coaxium. There we go. Coaxium. Okay. So in Star Wars, they have coaxium crystals. Well, I don't know if it's a crystal, but just coaxium, and it's an energy source that feeds all the ships so they can travel at light speed and not, right? And so, in Star Wars movies, Han Solo does the Kessel Run. They go to Kessel for a huge load of coaxium, and then they're supposed to deliver it before it explodes. Watch the movie Solo or more. But coaxium is a big deal. Okay, so coaxium is this energy. Okay, and so imagine that you have a stock company that owns a lot of coaxium. Okay, and coaxium is worth, I don't know, let's just say 1,000 credits for 1 ounce of coaxium. Okay, 1,000 credits. Cool. Obviously, you have a supply of that coaxium coming from the Kessel mines. Okay, so and the Kessel mines are really close to the maw, which is like the big black hole storm thing near the Kessel mines. Okay, hopefully this doesn't get too strange. But yeah, so ultimately, and again, I'm doing this all to not use real world examples, but imagine that one day at like 5 p.m. there's a major explosion in the Kessel mines that shuts them down, and these are the huge #1 manufacturers of coaxium or producers of coaxium. What's probably going to happen to the coaxium price? Well, it's going to go up, right? Because if coaxium is something that is constantly used and the supply lowers itself, people panic, and the coaxium that is left is going to go up because that's the only supply that you have, right? And so, or similarly, imagine that an exploring ship finds near a popular planet a huge like stockpile of coaxium, and they're like, oh, we just found like billions of credits worth of coaxium that we just discovered. What would happen to the coaxium price? In that case, it would probably go down because now you have a huge supply, and so versus what it previous was, but the demand's still the same. Supply and demand, right? So, in both of these cases, if we know that an event that's going to possibly affect the price of coaxium happens, then you want your automated system to immediately try to invest in coaxium stock before the rest of the world finds out and it goes up in price. On the other hand, if you have a tragic event that is probably going to, I don't know if you call it tragic, but even an event that's going to lower the price of coaxium, such as them discovering a huge amount, which is not tragic, then you also want to sell your coaxium companies so that you don't lose money when the stock goes down, right? And the same thing can be said about any real world corporation, like the empire. Imagine the emperor just died. If the emperor just died, then all the empire stock's going to go down because that was the leader of the empire. That's it. The empire is screwed now. The company's bankrupt, right? Vice versa, if the empire declares that they destroyed the rebellion, then the empire stock's going to go up, right? Because they succeeded in a great goal, and that's going to give some positive influence to the stock. All of these examples are based on news events, okay? So news events, you want to be able to get these news events as quickly as possible. In the stock market, there's a company that actually works on trying to get this kind of information as quickly as possible to the stockbrokers. I believe it's something by, I don't remember what the name is of that, but it's a machine. It's expensive. It's like $2,000 for like a really old machine, and all it is just providing you updates for things like stocks and news articles. If you remember the name or you know what I'm talking about, leave it in the description below in the comments. But I think it's by one of the Bloomberg. Oh, it's a Bloomberg terminal. Yeah, Bloomberg terminal. That's what I meant. Yeah. Okay. So you don't need to leave a comment. That's Bloomberg terminal. So Bloomberg terminals, they're really popular in finances because they do that. Because they basically allow you to receive news as quickly as possible. But it still requires a human to receive the news and process them in a way. The Bloomberg people, they actually, nowadays they automate all these things, but back in the day, they would try to say, okay, this is something positive or something negative, and just get it as quickly as possible to the end user. This was particularly important before the era of the internet when information travels so fast, right? Nowadays, it's super, the news can go around the world in seconds, okay? However, think about it. How are the news spread? They are spread through websites, right? And these websites, you can automate monitoring of these websites, particularly news websites, so that the moment that there is a positive or negative news related to a stock, if you are actively monitoring these websites by scraping the information from them, scraping all the headlines, and then running it to a sentiment analysis to know whether it's positive or negative information, then you can have something that in milliseconds can make a decision from a news article being posted to making a sell or buy order for a stock. So I know that was a little bit long of an example, But that all of that shows you the power of how web scraping can really affect finance, and it does nowadays. All news websites are ordered, are scraped, and information is scraped to be able to, as quickly as possible, react to world events. Okay, and this is not just for finance, but like think about it. President of the United States, right? They need to know what's happening in the world every day of every moment. And they need. How do they do that? They could just pay a bunch of interns to sit there and watch the news all day, or they can set up these automated systems, which can then flag it to somebody that is monitoring all of them, and then report it to the president per se, right? So like you can basically decrease the labor force from having 1,000 people each watching one channel on TV to just having one person who is just going to receive any alerts from anywhere and then go and tell the president, right? Or you could probably even automate that guy and just send a text to the president, I guess. But no, they probably have a guy. They have a guy who then tells the guy who then tells the president or something, right? But yeah, so big deal when it comes to finances and other sort of world event monitoring, okay? So big deal on that. Other examples of things like that that are popular that I could find on the internet are things like search engines. So that's actually, I would actually say that was the first ever type of web scraping was search engines. So Google. So back in the day, there was these things called spiders. Now I'm not talking about the arachnids. I'm talking about little programs that would run on the internet, that would visit every single website on the internet. They would kind of look at it, try to find out like useful keywords that kind of indicate what this website's about, and remember them, and then save them on Google. And then Google would update every like 2 or 3 weeks. They would update their search engine with all of the new websites posted, and this was something that would take weeks before it kind of got updated. Nowadays, everything happens instantly, almost. But back then, it was like, or you could also submit it. You could submit your website to Google so the spider bots would go and check it. Otherwise, it might take them a while to actually find your website. And so that was called submit your website for indexing. And so that's really the first kind of web scraping that I think was out there, was search engines trying to index the internet, identify any keywords that indicated that website, so that when you went on Google and you search for like funny monkey videos, then if it knew websites that had funny monkey videos, then it would actually return those. So yeah, I guess that's the OG, the original search engines, is the original scrapers probably. That and probably some secret government espionage, because they always doing that stuff. I guess add that into the list as well. Government surveillance, if the government wants to monitor again, whether that be through what I said with current events, but also monitoring in general, people finding criminal information on the internet. So when people are exchanging illicit images or videos or terrorist information, web scrapers can be very useful. So a funny story that I recall reading was that they would monitor emails. And what they would do is they would scrape the contents of the emails, but they would only scrape them of the emails that were sent. So one of the things the terrorists came up with is, instead of sending the emails, they would save them as a draft. And then the other terrorists, I guess, would log in and look at the draft, read the email, respond as a draft 2, and then leave it there. And then the other terrorists would come back and open up and look at the draft. So the emails were never being sent, so they were never ever like out there. So I guess they didn't script the draft back then. So just one example of a lot of different ways that they can scrape information. I had a cybersecurity class, and I'm trying to remember if there's anything there that I would want to mention of extraction that we did. Nothing for web, so I'll bring that up at some point other days. But nothing for the web that I can recall right now. Yeah. Okay, and finally, the last one that I also saw there is social media. So nowadays, social media is a big part of the world, whether you like it or not. And trying to analyze social media can help anything from customer trends to how a influencer is doing. If you want to actually hire an influencer or a streamer to sell your products, to just brand recognition. safety. So, for example, like if in social media, if people start planning something scary, then they can flag it and detect it and then act accordingly if they want to. So yeah, all of this information, but also just research. So like trying to do, and these really all apply when I say research. Like whether you're doing research on people, you can do research by scraping social media. You can do research on financial stuff. You can do research on anything, whether even you're researching how Google does its scraping. So all of those things. So ultimately, these are all usages of web scraping that you can have. And so this is what you want, and this is what you have. So how do you get it? How are the different ways that you are able to extract information? Okay, so let's talk about the different ways. The different ways to scrape. Sounds the word. Hold on, fix that. Okay, well, I guess before technology, the easiest way was just to go copy paste, right? Like, hell, let me scrape this word. Hold on. All right, copy, paste, save it on my file. I'm done, right? So copy paste, I suppose, was the pre-technology way of scraping information, and we all still use it once in a while when we need to copy something there. I guess you could also take a screenshot of a web page. So anything human related, okay? Obviously, the moment you throw in humans, that means labor cost and not very fast, at least compared to a machine. Okay? The next way that you could scrape something, whether it be from the final product or it be from the actual HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, etc., is what we just did in the last video, right? Regular expressions. So you'd actually use regular expressions to do pattern matching. So suppose that you have a website, and in the website, you have things like items for sale, TV 40-inch, and then you have a bunch of text, and then you have another item, and maybe some dollar signs here, $499.99, and then you have toaster, some text, $50, and so on, right? You could come up with, you could try to find a pattern as to how the data is organized within the website and try to extract the information you want. So suppose you're trying to extract what items are for sale and their prices. Well, if you know that every time that they list in the page that they list items, it starts with the word item for sale on the line before it, then you can use that as your pattern matching, and then immediately from there, extract whatever the next line contains, and then from there, do another regular expression that extracts anything after the dollar sign, and then basically line them up so that you get the right prices for the right items, right? This is all easier said than done because A, you could code this so it worked for a specific website, but like I said in the beginning of this video, the World Wide Web is an ever-evolving, thing, and ultimately, we've all seen how websites change design over time. Now, that's not to say that they're changing design because they want to hide this information. It's a different story that I'm going to get to. But it just might be because that, people get bored of the same look of things and they want fresh things. And what we like now is not the same thing that we liked 10 years ago. So there's trends that come and go, even within art of like a website. So you have to be able to extract information from a website reliably, but at the same time, that may work today and not tomorrow. So text pattern matching, it's cool, but you still run into that issue that it may not work for all websites. You have to still spend time, curating it so that it works for a website, and there's no guarantee of how long it'll work, so enjoy it while it lasts, basically. Okay? Another way that you can do it is through parsing. So parsing is a fancy term for essentially reading in the code that comes in HTML, which is the web code, and then basically if you know the formatting of how the HTML is written, then you can try to extract, and obviously this is not an HTML class, so there's only so much we can do here without knowing HTML. That's not to discourage you. There's a lot of ways that we get information, and HTML parsing is just one of them. But ultimately, with HTML parsing, if we know there's a certain format to how a script is being written, there's particular areas in the HTML that has data that we care about, like a wrapper or something, then you can actually write program that is able to take the information from a semi-structured, format of the data and then extract it from there. Okay? So while you may not know HTML parsing, you know a little bit about Python. So in Python, we know that strings are always containing quotes, right? And if we're doing an assignment, we usually do something like equals, and then we have our string, right? So you could write a parser right now with your Python knowledge. You could write a parser to be able to extract all strings mentioned in a Python program or Python script. One of the somewhat simplest ways you could do that, and by the way, you could do the parser just with regular expressions, but you could also just write a program, is to basically look for single quotes or double quotes and then take everything in between them. Now, you could potentially, along with that, take commented out code, because remember, you can technically comment out multiple lines of code like that in Python. So that would be one issue you would run into. But outside of that issue, you would probably extract all strings mentioned in the Python script, and then you can process those further to get the ones that you care about. So parsing itself it can be hard depending on how complicated the structure is of the script, but it's not something out of your reach. When it comes to HTML parsing, you just have to know the nits and gritties of what you're trying to do. But like I said, it's the same thing as Python parsing, where if you're trying to extract strings, you look for quotes. If you're trying to extract a certain function, you know what to look for by looking for the function name and things like that. So that's another use of web scraping. Another way that you can do it, and this is what I wanted to get to eventually today, is API. Okay? So what does API stand for? API stands for Application Programming Interface. Okay? So Application Programming Interface. And what it is certain websites actually want you to get information from them, but they don't want you to try to scrape the website. Instead, they want you to use a special system that they developed to feed you the information that you want. Now, when you take 651 and you understand how SQL works, I can then go back and say, oh, it kind of works like a SQL query. But since I'm making the assumption that you haven't taken that class yet, let me go ahead and kind of explain that a little bit further. So instead of you just kind of searching through the mess of the website and kind of hoping to get the information, certain websites are like, please don't do that. Instead, I'm going to give you all the information you want. All you have to do is basically send me what is known as an HTTP request with the information that you want. So, an HTTP request. What does this look like? Well, I'm going to show you in a little while some examples of this. In this case, I was working with the blockchain project, and there's a website called blockchain. I believe it's just blockchain.com. Yeah, blockchain.com. But I've done a couple before. And basically, what you can do is you can formulate a URL. So like www.blah-blah-blah.com. You can formulate a URL that has the request that you want. And so what you're going to get back from that is going to be the information you want, and you'll typically get it in a nicely formatted way. Now, nicely formatted for us is a CSV, but typically in the cases of websites, you're going to get a JSON. So you'll see what a JSON looks like later today. But it's just one way of formatting data. Okay? It's actually nicer than a CSV because the JSON can contain sort of a hierarchy of data, which can be useful to better organize the data than just being a CSV. Okay? So HTTP requests are great, but not all websites provide them. So that's the downside. If they all did, then I would just be like, forget about any other option, go there. But most of the time, they either, if they do provide them, then there's a limitation on how many you can do per hour, per day, or per minute. And sometimes they actually charge you money for it. So they might be like, you're allowed to do 100 requests per day, which for just about any of us is a pretty reasonable request. But for a company that's actually, doing this for money, and they're probably needing thousands of requests because they're doing a lot of stuff with this, an app or whatever, then for those, that it takes time to do those requests. Like, by the time I'm not saying there's a guy working on the other end. I'm saying that this information needs to be processed and sent over the internet. That takes processing time. Of course, the server needs to store the information to make it readily accessible. And there's space requirements, bandwidth requirements, processing time. All these things cost money. So it makes sense that they would want to charge money for this kind of request. And also, ultimately, it's also a discouraging way to prevent you from trying to just request a billion different things at once, because there's something called DDoS, which is when you have a denial of service, and basically that's going to have like a million different million different users trying to request the same item from a website, and you just get overwhelmed. It's like, what's happening? So it just blocks everybody. It's like, I am not going to listen to anybody until you all calm down and you request it like one at a time, kind of thing. And so the website for you looks like it crashed, even though it didn't. It's just trying to like block everybody. It's like slow down everybody. This thing kind of happens when there's like a new iPhone or something that comes out, and everybody's trying to pre-order it the moment the pre-order is open, and the website just blocks out because they're not expecting that huge amount of people to try to connect at the same time. So that kind of stuff can happen if you send too many requests. And so one way to prevent you from being blocked is to pay money, which that would discourage the amount of people that request it, and also refunds them for the actual cost of then doing those requests. Okay? There are other things that you can do for scraping, which we won't really talk much about in the class, but I'll just list them anyways. There are things such as document object model parsing. You can go on like Wikipedia and read about that if you're curious, read further. There's things like vertical aggregation, and computer vision as well. Computer vision being where you just do everything image-based. So, but those are more like fancy research potentials, but not really going anywhere right now for the time being. Okay. So it's a lot of information, I know. But before we actually get to fun coding and other things, we still have a little bit more to go. So, I guess today is more of like an overview day, and then the next section, I could just make it one long video, but I think I'll pause it after I finish going over the basics. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Yeah, so we have to explain a lot of things before we can actually start playing with the code. So yeah, I think what I'll do for the end of this is I'm going to talk about one more thing that's important when it comes to web scraping, and then the next video I'll start showing you examples, which I'll probably record immediately because I had it all ready to go. So I literally just stop recording. So you're welcome to keep going, but there's no reason to make it 1-2 hour long video when I can pause it. Okay, so the last two things that I want to say about web scraping that are important is one of them I already kind of mentioned, and that is that this is an ever-changing game because websites change. And so the two major challenges that you're going to kind of run into with web scraping is going to be variety. So it's a free country, free world per se. I'll make the website however I want. And while there's a lot of different sort of trends in how websites are, if you go to like Twitter, and then you go to like Facebook, and then you go to like other social medias, they all kind of have a trend nowadays because that's what's cool, TikTok, things like that. Similarly, when you go to websites like Amazon or like merchant stores like Kohl's, Target's, Walmart, Macy's, they all kind of look the same, but they're definitely not the same, right? And they're just different enough that when you're trying to create a web scraper with many of these systems, it might be perfectly, you might be able to come up with a regular expression that works perfectly for the Target website, but completely sucks for the Walmart website or the Kmart website. I don't know if Kmart still exists. And so ultimately, because of that variety, you have to cater your program to each website, and that can be a huge pain. And there's really no way around that. They're really unique and personal, and to be able to extract relevant information is just case by case basis, which is why it's not an easy task. News websites. A lot of news websites kind of look and feel the same, but they're still different enough that you would have to make your scrapers. And every time that they update the website for, because they want it to look fresh, your scraper might break. And then you got to go back and modify it and fix it. And, you got to make sure that you find out that it broke. Otherwise, you don't even know. And that kind of brings up the other challenge, which is durability. You might have a scraper that works perfectly. Like you can just get all the information you want from like Amazon. And you can get all the news you want from like Fox News and NBC or something. And then there's a major update to the look of the website because it's the New Year's, and it just breaks down. And so you might be surprised, but things change pretty quickly on the website world. They might not look like they change, but in the behind the scenes, they could have changed enough that things break. And so unstable scripts are pretty much the expectation to happen. And you have to, I guess it's good if your job is to be a web scraper, you got pretty good job security, because like you're gonna have to keep constantly updating those scripts. So if you finish having the perfect web scraper to scrape all the news from all the news outlets, like the major ones, and your boss is like, well, I guess I don't really need you anymore. Well, then don't worry, because he'll call you in a week and be like, hey, I'm sorry, the website's changed. And then he'll be like, well, you got to pay me not just for this, but all the missed time, because, race and everything, right? So, yeah, you got some good job security as a web scraper, I suppose. Okay? So those are the two major sort of challenges with scraping. But now let's talk about the final challenge, which is the final big thing that I want to talk about, and that's going to be the legality. We have to go a little bit lawyer mode for this. Okay, so the legality of scraping. Well, it's going to depend by country for sure. And so I'm going to kind of start focusing on the US because that's where we're teaching this class and that's where you might be working. But please, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not from the US and you want to do this in a different country, please check your local laws before you break the law. And definitely I am fully disclosing that I am not a lawyer, not approved or authorized to give legal advice, or financial advice, or anything advice except maybe Python advice. So, yeah, disclaimer there, okay? Second of all, in the US, scraping is the act of going to a public website usually. I mean, you could have a login. You could set up the login to auto login to a website to be able to scrape more information that is only available through login. Whether that login is something that you're getting from the API or you're just logging into Amazon so you can look at some stuff. Amazon's not a good example, but like the Times, like New York Times. I think New York Times requires you to log in to be able to watch, to be able to read older articles, right? So you could subscribe, you could pay money to subscribe, and then now you have access. So then you hook up your scraper and you start downloading older articles that contain like the word, let's see, Vietnam. You want to find out all Vietnam information. Maybe 2 words, maybe Vietnam and like, what would be interesting? Vietnam and maybe like the name of a specific mission or something, like Operation something, Vietnam. Okay, so you're gonna get all the information from there to do some analytics, right? You pay money to subscribe, so you set it up and you run it. And now the question is that legal? Or will we make it legal? So, well, here's the issue, okay? And particularly, not even for that level, because for that level, you might be like, well, you're logging in, you're paying. But like, what about a public website? What about the example I gave you already with the flight scan, with the scanner of the flights, that scraper? So like, you have a website that is able to monitor British Airways to see what the prices are for tickets, and find out if you can just, constantly monitor the tickets. That when the sale comes, you get that notification. Like, is that legal too? You're not saving any information. You're just looking at it and checking it. So, unfortunately, it's a gray zone. But it's actually trending more towards the not legal side than the legal side, okay? Now, let me give you an argument that I think most of you will understand as to why it might be illegal. Now, I do not want to advocate for either side because that's not what I'm here for. It's up to you to make a decision on whether you think it should be or shouldn't be legal. I'm just here to tell you what it trends to be looking like, okay? But the trend is saying, based on previous court cases and things like that, okay? So we all know that movies are copyrighted. So we know that when we buy a movie, we have the legal right to be able to see the movie. Same thing when it comes to buying a movie ticket. You can sit there in the movie theater and watch it. We also know that it is not legal for us to go in the movie theater with a camera and record the movie and then distribute it online, because that would be violation of copyrights. It's also not legal to, at home, from your DVD copy or Blu-ray copy, to make a copy of that and distribute it. Whether or not it is legal to make a copy of the movie for personal purposes, I think that's gone to court and has been a little bit okay. That went because of the fact that computers sell like Blu-ray copiers or DVD copiers. In fact, this was back in DVD days. They sell the ability to copy things, and there's a tool that allows you to crack the security on a DVD. And so the question was, is the tool legal or is it strictly for illegal purposes? And then I think the court said that it is okay. You are legally entitled in the U.S. to make a copy of your own movies to see them if you want to like store the original and just look at the copy, as long as it's only you who bought it that is doing the copy. That's legal. Even if you run the script to crack the security on there. And because of that, they were able to continue selling the software, or actually it was free, I think. They were able just to computers distributing the software and whatnot. So I guess that tells us that we can make copies of the data that we have a right to for personal purposes, but we bought that data. So that's a little bit of an indication of what we kind of can and can do with scraping. By the way, if you're more interested in that DVD stuff, I think I have in my CS301, which is my computer science ethics course, I have all the ethics stuff in there, including, I believe, this DVD stuff. I just don't remember which video. So, but you can check out my YouTube channel and look at each of the videos has a summary of what's in it, so you can look around there if you're curious. But going back to this, the reason I'm kind of giving you this example of the movies is because, in a way, when you're watching a website, that website is free, right? So that would be the equivalent that, imagine that in town squares, like in New York or something, Times Square, not Times Square. In Times Square in New York, imagine that in the big TV there, they are showcasing a movie, okay? How did they get that movie there? Maybe they paid the rights, like it's an older movie and they pay the copyright to showcase the movie and whatnot. The movie is being shown publicly. However, you recording that movie would be a copyright violation. So, technically speaking, just because something is out there in public doesn't give you the right under U.S. law to, and please, if you know more than I do on this stuff, tell me in the comments. It's cool stuff. I'm no lawyer. I just trying to regurgitate some of the information that I read. But from my understanding, you watching the movie is okay. You recording the movie is not okay. Some people in U.S. courts have said that scraping information from a public website would be the equivalent of you trying to record a movie, which would be a copyright infringement. So, okay, that is kind of like the precedent. So now let's just talk about what is real and what has happened in the world. But at least I'm trying to give you an argument as to why web scraping may be considered illegal. In fact, let's give you now the argument as to why it should be legal. On one end, we have the fact that the information is public. And if something is public and all you're doing is looking at it and making a decision based on that, the fact that you're looking at it 1,000 times per second or one time every 10 days shouldn't matter because the information is available 24/7 for anybody to see. So you monitoring the website from British Airways to see if the data, if the ticket price goes down, is no different than you paying somebody to sit there refreshing the page every minute and see if there's a deal. So the argument is said that you're not saving the data, You're simply looking at it and making a decision on it. Should it be legal? Well, I don't see why not, right? So there you go. Now you have both arguments. So with that, let's turn around and talk about what has happened and what kind of indications. Because I mean, remember, the law in the U.S., there's only so much that's written, and then everything else is left for interpretation. And one of the best ways that we can see how something's going to be interpreted is by looking at previous court cases. And of course, even that can also be misleading because, ultimately it's going to be up to the judge per se. But, at least you can use this as arguments, pro and con, whenever you're trying to defend yourself because you got sued because your scraper was making too much money for somebody and they sued you or something, okay? So, there's a couple of laws out there. I'm not going to really talk much about how they work, but I'm going to list them here in case you want to look at them. There's the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Also, it's just CFAA. When was this passed? 1986. So that's pre-internet, or I guess right on the start of internet, I suppose. No, because internet was mid-90s, so yeah. It's a United States cybersecurity bill that was enacted in 1986 as an amendment to existing computer fraud law, which has been included in the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984. The law prohibits accessing a computer without authorization or in excess of authorization. So in other words, the law says that if you find a computer out there, at work that is not yours, and you access it, then you're breaking the law because you're accessing something you shouldn't. Or if you have access to the computer, but you're not allowed to access certain parts of it, and you do because you hacked in or because you somehow found a way in or something, that's also a crime. And of course, this was kind of brought in because there was, computer-related crimes that were being unpunished back then. Weirdly, believe it or not, one of the catalysts for this law was a movie, War Games, where they're talking about somebody breaking in and hacking into a computer and things like that. And so ultimately, they wanted to extend existing laws about property that's intangible, so that the computer was technically part of your property. Also, I don't know if this was this law, but that also kind of extended your rights, there's a lot of laws. Again, back when I was doing the 301 stuff, I knew more about the law and I could tell you more about it, but now I forgot a lot of it because it's been a year and a half. But this also applies to privacy laws and what the government can and can't do, like your computer. They can't just go into your computer unless they have a warrant, and things like that. So this all kind of plays into the scraping because when scraping was first a thing, there was no laws about it. So they had to look at existing laws to kind of extend them to see how they work. One of those things that they kind of extend is trespassing. So, the concept of trespassing, going where you're not supposed to and whatnot. There's something called trespass to chattels. And ultimately, it's the idea that you're in somebody else's property when they don't want you to be there. And so if somebody says you can't access my website and you access their website, that is technically a form of trespassing, as weird as that sounds, okay? So with all of that, the first sort of known of the major cases that came with scraping was eBay. Versus, let me copy this name right, Withers Edge. So I guess there's a lot of cases with this, but this is one of the bigger ones, okay? So let me see what year eBay versus Withers Edge was. This was in 2000, actually, okay. And this was a Northern District of California, United States District Court, okay? So just if you look it up as eBay versus Withers Edge, you can find the Wikipedia entry on it. So what was this? Withers Edge was a software which I believe was sold that allowed people to do what is known as sniping. So what is sniping? If anybody remembers the eBay days, basically eBay is an auctioning website, allows you to place a bid on an item that you would sell on the internet. So let's say I have this bottle of water. It's a very historic bottle of water because it was drank by me live during a lecture about eBay's Bidder's Edge. So I go and put this on eBay. Maybe my students really, I don't know, maybe I have like a fan of students who want to buy an empty bottle or something. I don't know. Okay, so I put this on eBay, and I put an initial price of 1 penny, plus shipping and handling of $10 or something. Okay, and so this thing starts to go like $1. Somebody says $2. Somebody says $3. I don't know why they would bet for an empty bottle of water, but yeah, it's up to $3. Okay, and there's still like 10 days left. And it kind of goes, slowly over the course of the days, like 350, 351, and so on. And the winning bidder is like, there's 1 hour left, and the winning bidder bet $4, and it's late at night, so he goes to sleep. You could actually put a limit of how much you wanted to bid for the item. So like, even though it's at $4, you could say I'm willing to pay up to $5. So if somebody bet $4.50, you would automatically up your bid to like $4.51. But if somebody bid $5.01, then like, you would stay at $4, and then they would just bid at $5.01, and they would be in first place. So one of the things that ended up happening after, at the beginning, eBay was awesome because all these things would happen. You want to make sure you're there until the end of the auction to kind of babysit it and make sure that you're okay. So one of the things that ended up happening was people developed programs to do what's known as sniping, which meant on the last few seconds of an eBay bid, of like the bidding period, they would place a bet or place a bid that was higher than what would be the limit, and then you wouldn't really have a chance to react. So like maybe internally you really wanted this bottle and you were willing to pay up to $10, but you didn't say that. You had your bid at $5, but only if somebody bid at $6, you would bid with like higher than $6, closer to 10. But the reason you don't do that is because you don't want to like bid too early in the game, because that just like raises the price unnecessarily. You want to wait till it's like near the end. So like, people, like if somebody outbids you, you want to think about it for a second, but if the time's running out, then maybe you don't bid. So you tend to wait until the end, but that's like a human thing you do. What the automated system would do is you would literally set it so like the last second of the bid, they would place the highest possible that you were willing to pay so that it beats whatever the price is. And like in the items that were not that highly priced, but that you were willing to pay but nobody bet, you would just kind of leave it be. You would get it stolen last second. Yeah, like no chance to react. You're like, oh my gosh, like what just happened? Like some guy just literally bet money and just took my bottle now for $8, even though I would have paid $10 for it. And so eBay tried to implement some safeguards to this, like I don't know if they tried this, if they try to extend bidding, but they really didn't like it because this was really like a problem essentially for that. Okay. Also, it having automated bidding, because the way they did this is they wrote a program that was scraping the price, and whenever the price, when the timer was about to run out, they looked at the price, they looked at what you had set it as the maximum, and they tried bidding higher than that to see if you would get it, right? So eBay didn't like this because people got a lot of complaints, and it kind of ruined the bidding experience for people when these snipers would just come and take all the items away. I mean, of course, if you were willing to pay higher than the sniper, then this wouldn't happen, but it's not really how bidding works. And so, because this became so popular and it was something that it was being, I think, sold for money, eBay was like, okay, I need to make this stop, so I'm going to sue Bidder's Edge and see if they're liable for trespass. And so that's what they did. The lawsuit resulted in an injunction ordering Bidder's Edge to stop accessing, collecting, and indexing auctions from the eBay website. Basically, in order to succeed on the claims of trespass, they have to demonstrate that like the Bidder's Edge was intentionally and without authorization interfering with the possessory interest in the computer system, and the defendant was unauthorized use caused damage to eBay. So that was, they had to prove that like them doing this was causing damage to eBay and that it was unauthorized, and they pretty much succeeded as far as I understand, because they resulted in the injunction to stop accessing the website. And so again, was good or wrong. Like, technically speaking, all they were doing was they were looking at the websites and then posting that information for the customers to then set it up so that they could do the automatic bidding on items that they were looking for on the last second, right? And so they said, okay, yes, I'm making eBay available to everybody with an account, and the account is free, but I don't want you to do this. Like, I don't want you. And if you do it, then technically you are trespassing and breaking the law. So that was an interesting case. And again, an example of web scraping not being legal. Another case that I want to talk about, and this is why I was talking about the airline stuff, is because that actually did happen. So it wasn't British Airways. The real airline was actually American Airlines. And let me see what the name of the case is for that one. Do I have it somewhere here? Yeah. So hold on. American Airlines versus Fairchase. In the District Court, 67 Court of Tarrant County, Texas. Case number 067, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. February 12, 2003. Okay, so it's 2003. So American Airlines as Incorporated versus Fairchase Incorporated. Okay, so what is this one? This one, it actually succeeded as well. They successfully obtained an injunction from a Texas trial court stopping Chase from selling software that enable users to compare online fares in the software, which also searches American Airlines websites for fares. So basically what I said, you write a web scraper that goes to American Airlines website, looks at all the fares, compares them with other websites from other airlines, and basically does what nowadays like Expedia or Google Flight does. But they didn't like that because I guess American Airlines was selling expensive tickets and people were not buying them because they saw they could compare. And so the airline basically argued that the software to search, the scraping software, trespassed American Airlines servers when it collected the publicly available data. Fairchase actually filed an appeal in March 2003, but the case was kind of dropped quietly after they agreed to settle and the appeal was dropped. This isn't something completely just American Airlines. Similar thing happened with Southwest Airlines and also Fairchase, I think. And another firm called Outtask. For the Southwest one, let's see what happened. They claimed examples of computer abuse, damage, loss, unauthorized access of Southwest site, and interference in business relations, trespass, harmful access by computer. They claim that screen scraping constitutes into what is known legally as misappropriation and unjust enrichment, as well as being a breach of the website's user agreement. So websites have user agreements which might actually forbid you from scraping information from them. Okay. In this case, Outtask, which was the company that was involved, I guess another one of those sort of pre-Expedia days. They denied all these claims, claiming that the prevailing law in this case should be U.S. copyright law, and that under copyright, the pieces of information being scraped would not be subject to copyright protection. Although the cases were never resolved in the Supreme Court of the United States, Fairchase was eventually shuttered by parent company Yahoo, and Outtask was purchased by travel expense company Concur. I vaguely remember Concur, and so on. So there's not that many cases, but it tends to indicate that the web scrapers tend to be on the losing side. Do I have any other ones that I wanted to bring up? This one's a good one. This is more recent. So Facebook Incorporated versus Power Ventures Incorporated was a district court ruling in 2012 that Power Ventures could not scrape Facebook pages on behalf of a Facebook user. So what they were doing was they would allow you to scrape information from other users as long as you were doing it on your own. So it wasn't the company doing it, it was you doing it on your machine. And the case is on appeal, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation filed a brief in 2015 asking that it be overturned. I'm assuming Facebook pretty much won that. Let me find out. So they claimed violation of the CAN-SPAM Act, which is that Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and the California Comprehensive Computer Data Access and Fraud Act. And they're saying that Power Ventures made copies of the PayPal website during the processing of extracting user information. So they're saying that even though they extracted information, that while they're doing it, they made a copy, so that was the violation. Facebook argued that this process causes both direct and indirect copyright infringement and violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA. So the case is pending. The defendant's motion to dismiss is denied. The defendant's motion for a more definite statement granted in part, denied in part. So it's still going, I guess. That's probably like a really slow case then. So, or maybe they did a way to hold it. I don't know. So feel free to look more into this. You can just go look at Wikipedia web scraping to find out more. This is only the US, but like there's the same kind of story happening in the EU and other countries as well. Okay? There are, however, some sort of nice positives in copyright law, like there is, of course, the Fair Use Act and educational purposes, things like that. And so not all web scraping is illegal, per se. Well, actually, no web scraping is illegal until they tell you it's illegal. So tread carefully, though. Read the user terms of agreements and always, make sure you don't. More than likely, the way web scraping works is if you do web scraping where you shouldn't, you probably get some sort of cease and desist letter. And if you stop there and then, typically things tend to end amicably. It's when you don't stop that you end up in court, and this kind of thing happens. Okay? There are websites like the Internet Archive that have been running for decades now, and they have copies of most of the internet, publicly available websites, without being considered in violation of copyright law. So that's a big one. So that's not to scare you that, since I've said all negative court cases, that scraping is going to go get you in jail or something. It's not. First of all, they're lawsuits, but also, actually, no, they're technically criminal suits as well. But yeah, so it's not going to get you in jail as long as you're careful. And in this class, of course, if you're doing it for educational purposes and things like that, you should be okay. But I'm just warning you. If you actually end up doing this for a living or things like that, you have to tread carefully and make sure you read upon the law, get a good lawyer, okay? So, yep, that's all I want to say. That's going to be the end of the lecture. Like I said, I'm going to probably record the next lecture immediately because I have it ready to go. But in the next lecture, I am going to provide to you some examples. We're going to start by looking at APIs, which is why I had APIs up here. But now I'm going to erase it since it'll be the next video. And so, essentially, what we're going to be looking at are some case examples that I've done in the past. So we're going to be looking at, I won't spoil it. I'll let you see it on the next video. But yeah, we'll look at some examples. I'm just in those cases, I already have the code done. So we'll look at the code. We'll look at how they get done, and then how they work. Hopefully they still work. And you get to see some examples of web scraping, and then from there we'll go on. Okay. But for now, hopefully this video gave you like a nice and comprehensive overview of web scraping, pros and cons, how it works, what the challenges are, the different types, and all in all, kind of add it to your tool set of different ways of getting data so that you can actually do data analytics, right? It's important to get data. That's probably the hardest step in my opinion. So having said that, thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care.